The plane is Maddie's only way to get to Alaska for hunting. But this year, just as the hunting season started, he experienced a life or death moment mid-flight. The plane's engine suddenly went out. As a seasoned hunter in Alaska, how would Maddie manage to save himself? With the annual hunting season arriving, Maddie, who had been quiet for half a year, was ready to shine again. Every year during this season, Maddie flies hundreds of kilometers to the northern mountains of Alaska to hunt. Last season, he only made $4,000 all winter, and after deducting fuel and other expenses, Maddie practically broke even, forcing him to dip into his savings in the following months. This year, to make up for last season's losses, he plans to collect at least 400 pelts during the hunting season, averaging at least 3 per day. If he doesn't make money this hunting season, he fears he might end up working in a factory. This early winter, temperatures are higher than usual, and it hasn't snowed yet. Maddie usually relies on tracking animal movements in the snow to set his traps. Now, with no snow, Maddie feels quite hindered. But time waits for no one, so he plans to fly to the hunting area and set traps depending on the situation. The plane is the only mode of transportation to the hunting grounds. Maddie's plane is a small, light aircraft without advanced instruments, so he has to rely on his vision to judge any conditions. To prevent any mid-journey mishaps, he repeatedly checks the condition of the plane. For Maddie, this is all routine. After all, this is his life. After making sure everything was okay, Maddie said goodbye to his wife and daughter. As the plane's engines roared to life, Maddie slowly flew toward the distance. However, the journey wasn't as smooth as he imagined. The sky, initially clear, suddenly turned green. Dark clouds slowly pressed down toward him, and sleet and strong winds hit him head-on. In such harsh weather, the sleet falling on the plane quickly turned to ice, increasing the weight of the aircraft, thus decreasing its lift and thrust. With visibility also very low, you can imagine how dangerous the situation became. But the worst was yet to come. Just as Maddie was thinking of a solution, the plane's engine suddenly shut off. This was really adding insult to injury. After losing power, the plane glided rapidly towards the ground. Fortunately, the engine restarted successfully, and the plane flew up again. It has to be said, he really was lucky to survive. With a smile of relief after the ordeal, Maddie realized the weather was getting even worse. This condition was no longer suitable for flying. So, Maddie planned to find a place to land and wait for better weather tomorrow before taking off again. Soon, an exposed riverbank caught his attention. This landing spot was the best he could find at the moment. Without any hesitation, Maddie turned the plane towards the riverbank and flew over. The landing went very smoothly. Now, he would rest here for the night and set off again when the weather improved tomorrow. Hunting is Tom and his wife's main source of income. However, this year's hunting season had just begun when some very bad news came. Not far from Tom's house, in a nearby valley, nature revealed its most terrifying weapon: a wildfire. Autumn is known locally as the fire season. During this season, the vegetation in the forest is at its driest of the year. Once a fire starts, the devastation can be immense. In the face of such a massive wildfire, humans seem very fragile in the face of nature's fury. Right now, a wildfire is rapidly spreading towards Tom's house. Tom needs to act quickly. He plans to create a new fire break. These large trees are undoubtedly dangerous. Once ignited by the fire, with the wind's help, even a fire break might be useless. So, Tom's first task is to cut down these risky trees. With time pressing and a heavy task ahead, Tom grabs his chainsaw and gets to work. Nancy, standing by, looks on with worry. She fears a tree might suddenly fall, or the chainsaw might get stuck, putting Tom in danger. After all, Tom isn't the young, strong man he once was. But as things often go, what Nancy feared happened. The chainsaw got stuck in the tree. Pulling it out wasn't an option. Tom had to think of something else. Finally, the tree fell, and the chainsaw, like a wild horse, tumbled down the slope. Tom couldn't help but remark on the unpredictability of life. Although the process wasn't smooth, at least he had dealt with the most dangerous tree. Just then, Tom's good friend Tim arrived. The two have been close friends for over 20 years. Whenever one faces a tough situation, as good friends do, they help each other out. Tim then joined Tom in the logging effort. The wildfire spread very quickly. Upon hearing the news, local authorities immediately dispatched helicopters to control the fire. After some frantic efforts, the fire was quickly brought under control. But just as Tom was about to breathe a sigh of relief, another piece of bad news reached his ears. Another fire had started to the south of them. This news tightened their nerves just as they were about to relax. By now, a safe area had been cleared around the house. Now they needed to move to the south. The road in front of them served as a natural fire break. They just needed to widen it and cut down some of the taller trees. This way, they could ensure quality while speeding up the process. After explaining, the two got busy. Building a fire break is a tough physical task, especially for someone Tom's age. He quickly started to feel the strain, but he found joy in this lifestyle. Perhaps that's what true passion is. After continuous effort, they finished expanding the fire break by nightfall. As dusk fell, the fire seemed to burn even brighter, signaling a sleepless night ahead. By the next day, good news spread across the Rocky Mountains. The wildfire had been controlled. Sadly, many homes were lost to the flames due to delayed rescue efforts. With the wildfire crisis averted, Tom and his wife leisurely sipped tea in front of their cabin. Next, they needed to prepare for the winter. Firewood wasn't a concern, since the trees they had cut could fill that need. Now, securing food for the winter was their priority. But with only 9 days left in the fall deer hunting season, Tom needed to hurry. The winter hunting season had just started, and Matty had faced all sorts of setbacks. Fortunately, today's weather finally decided not to oppose him. Packing up his gear, Matty continued his journey to Alaska. With good weather came a good mood, and Matty flew smoothly all the way. This year, winter was arriving later than usual, showing no signs of snow yet. All this news is bad news for Matty. He relies on snow to track animal movements for setting traps. Without snow, his traps are hardly effective. This year's weather is really giving Matty a headache. After a long flight, Matty arrived above his destination. His landing spot was a relatively flat grassland. After adjusting his approach, Matty landed smoothly. Next, he had to walk 5 kilometers through dense forest to reach his hunting cabin. After packing up his gear and checking his shotgun was loaded, he headed towards the cabin. In this wild forest, many predators lurked, so Matty was extremely cautious with every step. After navigating through dense woods and crossing a swift stream, Matty reached the front of his hunting cabin. However, a pile of brown bear droppings right in front made him more alert. The cabin had been unattended for 6 months, and a big fellow might have taken residence inside. With a hunter's instinct, Matty was ready to shoot at any moment. He carefully approached the cabin, first checking around the house for any damage. After confirming all was clear, Matty finally opened the door. Now, he needed a good night's rest and would prepare for winter necessities tomorrow. After a long dark night, Matty planned to gather enough firewood for the winter. But just as he was busy at work, the call of a moose caught his attention. After confirming, it was indeed an adult male moose that had wandered into his camp. For Matty, a professional hunter, this was an opportunity not to be missed. So, he immediately grabbed his shotgun. But as he aimed at the target, Matty hesitated. Here, without a fridge, he used to rely on the cold weather to freeze the meat. But this year's warm temperatures wouldn't preserve the moose meat. If it spoiled, he would be wasting valuable resources. Faced with these factors, Matty was torn. To shoot or not to shoot? Was he really about to let such a good opportunity slip away? If you were Matty, what would you choose? In the end, Matty put down his shotgun and watched the moose walk away. He seemed to have forgotten that he could make smoked meat. Now, he just hoped another opportunity like this would come knocking again. The Rocky Mountains were already covered in heavy snow. Tom strolled leisurely on the snow, searching for deer tracks. Due to the wildfires, his hunting had been delayed, and now, with just a few days left in the hunting season, Tom needed to speed up gathering meat for the winter. The wilderness after the heavy snow provided much assistance to Tom. The snow revealed many traces of deer activity. Based on years of hunting experience, Tom believed they would return. So he found a hidden spot to wait for the deer. But as expected of an experienced hunter, he didn't have to wait long. A few deer appeared from the bushes ahead, happily hopping through the snow, unaware they were being watched. Tom slowly raised his shotgun, carefully picking out the fattest one among them. Soon, a target ran into his line of sight. It was an adult male deer, which could provide Tom with hundreds of pounds of meat. Tom took his shot when the moment was right. However, the deer just bounced away, seemingly unscathed. Had he missed? Tom was a bit confused at this point. He thought, although he's older, his shooting shouldn't be this bad. So, he decided to follow up and see what happened. Not far ahead, he spotted a long trail of blood in the snow. Clearly, he had hit his target. Following the blood trail, he soon found the white-tailed deer lying in the snow. Since deer organs are very high in heat, to ensure the meat stayed fresh, Tom knew he had to remove the organs quickly. This would help cool the deer's body temperature, keeping the meat fresh and flavorful. With skilled hands, Tom quickly processed the organs. Now, he had to drag the deer 3 kilometers to his truck. The deer weighed about 100 kilograms, a tough task for someone Tom's age. But he couldn't linger too long, as the scent of blood could easily attract predators. When he got home, Tom didn't rest but started processing the deer meat right away. During this critical period, brown bears were foraging for food before hibernation. If they caught the scent of blood, they would definitely come to steal the food. The total value of an adult deer can reach $4,000. Not only is the meat edible, but the antlers and hide can also be sold for money. If a brown bear did invade, Tom would suffer heavy losses. Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed from the woods. Tom immediately became more alert. He picked up his shotgun and cautiously walked towards the forest. However, the sight that met his eyes only increased his worries. Clear bear tracks confirmed he wasn't seeing things. His place had clearly caught a bear's attention. To prevent any incidents, Tom sped up the processing when he got back. Luckily, the anticipated problems didn't arise, and by now, the whole deer had been divided and packed. These provisions would be crucial for the couple's winter survival. This year's winter hunting season had started off poorly for Maddie, especially this year with Alaska's temperatures unusually high, leading to no snowfall yet. Maddie's only mode of transport here is a snowmobile, which is unusable without snow. So, with these unfavorable factors, Maddie could only wait helplessly. But he wasn't idle during this downtime. He first prepared enough firewood for the winter. Then he boiled his traps in a metal barrel with some spices, aiming to remove any iron smell. Because animals have a very keen sense of smell, if they detect any human scent on the traps, they would definitely stay away, greatly reducing his chances of catching prey. To meet his target of 450 pelts, Maddie was naturally meticulous in these preparations. Now, all he could do was pray for snow to come soon. After a long 2-day wait, the much-anticipated heavy snow finally fell. However, the temperature was still high, and the snow outside was already showing signs of melting. Ideally, it wasn't the best time to set traps, but Maddie was out of patience and couldn't wait any longer. He had already fallen behind these past few days. If he delayed any further, he might end up facing tough times next year again. The bag he carried was filled with rotting reindeer hide strips. Maddie had packed these hides in the bag at the start of autumn to let them decompose naturally. The purpose was to let the rotting hides emit a foul smell. Since his target prey were scavengers, the stronger the bait smelled, the better his chances of catching something. In this harsh climate, it's hard for any animal to survive, so this kind of bait was very attractive to them. After getting his gear ready, Maddie set off on his snowmobile. He quickly reached the first setup spot. It was a slanted log. Maddie first secured the bait at the top of the log, then followed with the trap right behind it. After setting it all up, he even smeared some prodi, the laugan ma sauce he couldn't bear to eat himself, around the bait. Clearly, He was really investing in this. Then Maddie hurried to the next setup spot. Years of hunting had given Maddie a personal hunting route here. He just needed to follow the traps set in his memory. After a while, Maddie was now over 20 kilometers away from the hunting cabin. It was getting late, and Maddie planned to head back. But he was worried about the snowmobile breaking down on the way. The snow wasn't thick, and after a day's use, the snowmobile's skis and tracks had worn down significantly against the ground. Continuing like this, he feared the snowmobile might stall again, just like last year, a painful memory he didn't want to repeat. So, Maddie decided to take a risk and drive over the river surface. However, the ice was not very thick, and he wasn't sure if it could bear the weight of the snowmobile. After checking the ice, Maddie decided to give it a try. As the sound of cracking ice echoed beneath him, Maddie unconsciously sped up. Fortunately, no accidents happened, and he made it back to the hunting cabin safely. Currently, Maddie's hunting progress was far behind his target. In the time remaining, can he achieve his goal of 450 pelts? Let's wait and see. Do you know how long it takes to handcraft a snakeskin bow and arrow? Let this old hunter tell you next. Tom has lived in the deep mountains for over 30 years. He relies on his primitive skills to make traditional handicrafts and clothing, earning his daily expenses by selling them. So, Tom is quite well known locally. Today, someone came to see him. Charlie, Tom's neighbor, wanted to ask Tom to make a handmade bow and arrow for his son, but he only gave Tom 2 days to do it, which really put Tom in a tough spot. Normally, it takes at least 5 days to make a handmade bow and arrow. Charlie knew 2 days was very short, so he explained his reason. He had planned to make it himself, but after several unsuccessful attempts, even he wasn't satisfied with his own work. Now, he had wasted almost all the time, and the promise to his son was due soon. He had no choice but to turn to Tom for help. As a father, he didn't want to let his son down. Moved by his neighbor's effort, Tom decisively agreed to help. Though making handicrafts is Tom's specialty, finishing it in 2 days was still a big challenge for him. A good bow needs a fine piece of wood. Tom went to the storeroom and took out some long-stored wood. He first used an axe to chop off the excess parts, then slowly shaped it with traditional tools. Making a pure handmade bow and arrow is a tedious job. 10 hours flew by, and it was already dark. The bow was starting to take shape in Tom's hands. Nancy, worried about her husband's health, brought him a cup of coffee to warm up. Although she wanted to help, she didn't know how to make a bow. So, all she could do was remind Tom to take care of himself. By the next day's sunrise, Tom was covered in yellow sawdust. He had been working non-stop since he started the day before. Nancy came to see him again in the morning. Seeing the sawdust on her husband and his tired face, her face was filled with worry. But Nancy didn't say much, because she knew Tom's character. He would do everything he could to fulfill a promise. The bow's body was now formed. Next was to strengthen its durability and flexibility, to ensure it wouldn't break easily. The next steps were tedious but straightforward, so Nancy came to help as well. They covered the bow with animal tendons to enhance its flexibility. Tom was working with a piece of rattlesnake skin, which would be the bow's cover. Hours passed again, and Charlie arrived as promised. By then, Tom had just finished the final touches on the bow and arrow. To ensure quality, Tom tested the bow in front of Charlie. He pulled it back and shot an arrow straight at the target. The shot was slightly off, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that Tom's products were always top quality. Seeing the finished bow with its skin, Charlie was very satisfied. With the bow in hand, he could finally go back and fulfill his promise to his son. Seeing his neighbors so pleased, Tom was naturally very happy. Now, he could go home and get some well-deserved sleep. At 4 a.m., Maddie was already up early making breakfast. Living in the harsh cold of Alaska, getting enough calories is essential for staying active outdoors. So, Maddie always eats high-calorie foods. Now that the snow outside was thick enough, Maddie made a new plan to quickly meet his target of 450 pelts. He plans to set up more trap sites. To do that, he needs to keep expanding his hunting routes. So, his work is going to be very busy. After breakfast, Matty started his busy day. Now, the ice on Squirrel River is over 20 centimeters thick. The snowmobile can safely travel on it. Also, the wide, flat river surface speeds up Matty's progress, providing a huge convenience for opening new hunting lines. After some time speeding along, Matty arrived at his ideal area for expansion. Opening new hunting lines is hard work. Places like small, steep slopes, he encounters them every so often and has to smooth them out each time. Then there are the crisscrossed deadwoods. Due to frequent storms in Alaska, bent deadwoods are a common sight. To open a new hunting area, Matty has to clear every obstacle he encounters. It's really exhausting work, but to achieve his goals, Matty is willing to do even the toughest jobs. Since daylight in Alaska is very short now, the sun is out for less than an hour and a half. Matty is now 20 kilometers away from the hunting cabin. To avoid traveling in the dark, Matty decides to call it a day. But just as he's about to head back, a familiar problem crops up. His snowmobile starts acting up again. This instantly cools his mood. Last year, he had a similar issue and ended up walking over 4 hours in the night to get home, nearly becoming a human ice sculpture. He definitely doesn't want to experience that again. After inspecting it, Matty suspects that the wiring might be short-circuited due to moisture from the snow. So, he decides to let the snowmobile cool down before trying again. Meanwhile, the temperature in the wilderness is dropping fast, and his fingers are already numb from the cold. He needs to start a fire immediately for warmth. Quickly, Matty pulls out a Chinese brand lighter from his pocket, saying with it, "You can survive longer in the icy wilderness." An hour passes, and it's getting dark. Matty tries to start the snowmobile again, and thankfully, it doesn't act up this time. He successfully starts it and heads back to the hunting cabin at full speed. Over the next few days, Matty is constantly on the move, developing hunting routes and checking traps. His efforts finally pay off today, catching the first pine dace of the year. Today, as Matty is opening a new line, he hears the roar of an airplane overhead. He looks up and smiles. His ordered item has arrived. A small plane flies in the sky. Matty has been waiting here for a while. The new engine for his snowmobile has finally arrived. This month, Matty has made a fortune. Now he finally has the courage to replace that old engine that kept acting up. The neighbor, Andy, escorted the engine. Seeing him, Matty was thrilled and couldn't stop chatting with Andy. It's clear his monotonous life was driving him a bit crazy. Besides delivering the engine, Andy was here for another reason. He wanted to learn from Matty and become a fur hunter himself. Matty was naturally delighted to hear this. After all, he finally had some company here. Watching the luggage being unloaded from the plane, it was obvious that Andy was here for a serious stint. After watching the plane fly away, Matty drove with Andy back to the hunting cabin. They soon arrived back at the cabin. Matty couldn't wait to show Andy how to install the new engine. From his hurried manner, it was clear he was really spooked by the old engine. On the other hand, he was eager to officially take on his new apprentice, since being alone out here is really lonely. Then Andy got started. But right off the bat, he looked completely lost, obviously clueless about what to do. But Matty didn't make it hard for him. Instead, he took the tools from Andy's hands and started working while explaining everything to him. From Andy's attentive expression, it was clear he was also very keen on this lifestyle. Just like that, changing the engine became Andy's first lesson. With the engine replaced, the snowmobile started up smoothly. Andy had passed his first test. A new day dawned, and Matty was already planning his agenda. Now, with an extra pair of hands, he figured he could expand his hunting area even more. Obviously, there's no such thing as a free lunch. After breakfast, the mentor and apprentice headed out into the wilderness. They quickly arrived at a trap site. Matty's first lesson was on setting a simple trap, typically used for hunting. The method is straightforward. Use branches to build a triangular space under a tree, place the bait at the back, follow with a trap covered by snow. If an animal goes for the bait, it's sure to get caught in the trap. After setting the trap, they moved to the next site. Next, Matty taught how to set a mink trap. First, tie a log at an angle to a big tree. Put the bait at the top of the log. with the trap right behind it. If a marten goes for the bait, it must step on the trap. Andy listened very carefully, quickly absorbing everything Maddie taught. It won't be long before Andy is ready to go it alone. With Andy's help, Maddie felt twice as confident. To make the most of Andy's free labor, he planned to build another hunting cabin on the other side of the hunting area. This would save them a lot of time traveling back and forth. Upon hearing this, Andy felt a wave of shock, thinking Maddie was really not holding back. What will Maddie do next with his free apprentice? Let's wait and see. Since taking on an apprentice, Maddie has been like a man possessed. He spends his time either setting traps with Andy or expanding their territory. Now, on top of the original hunting lines, Maddie has extended them by 15 kilometers, really squeezing every bit of work out of Andy. After a few days of learning, Andy has basically mastered what Maddie taught. Today, he will test what Andy has learned over the past few days. He specifically designated a hunting line for Andy to manage on his own. If Andy can handle it all, it will greatly improve Maddie's efficiency in checking traps. It's safe to say he played his cards well. Then, the two split up. Maddie drove his snowmobile in one direction, leaving Andy to fend for himself in the windy wilderness. Andy's route was 6 kilometers long. Not too long, but not short either. He tightened his snow boots and strode forward confidently. Maddie had his own ideas about how to teach Andy. In this harsh land, loneliness and solitude are constant companions. Their biggest enemies are not wild beasts, but the loneliness and fear within. As a qualified Alaskan fur hunter, if he can't face solitude and fear, he's not cut out to be a hunter. This is what Maddie hoped Andy would come to understand on his own. The wilderness was thick with snow. Andy struggled to the first trap, which, unfortunately, was empty. Though he didn't catch anything, Andy dutifully cleared the snow off it. But the rookie actually used his hand to check the trap, thankfully only catching his glove. After resetting the trap, Andy moved on to the next location. This trap was meant for catching bobcats, but it was also empty. Several traps in a row turned up empty, which was somewhat disheartening for the newbie. But that's hunting for you. Not every trap is going to catch something. It's mostly up to whether nature feels like giving. So, Andy headed to the next station with hope. This time, luck was on his side. A pine marten was caught in the trap. Andy instantly smiled with joy. This was his first catch checking traps alone, a significant milestone for him. He then carefully followed Maddie's instructions to remove the catch and pack it neatly in his backpack. The day quickly passed, and it gradually got darker. Andy arrived at the designated meeting spot to wait for Maddie. However, after an hour or two, it was completely dark, and Maddie still hadn't shown up. Andy started to worry. Was his master not waiting for him and had gone back alone? Anxiety swirled in his mind. As time ticked by, the temperature kept dropping. Soon, Andy couldn't stand the cold anymore and decided not to wait any longer. He planned to walk back on his own. But the Alaskan night is very dangerous, often accompanied by the howling of wolves. This made the already anxious Andy even more unsettled. Fortunately, it wasn't long before Maddie caught up from behind. Andy finally relaxed. Was Maddie late on purpose to let Andy experience the loneliness and solitude of the wilderness? What do you think? Tom is a master at trapping beavers. Every year at this time, he roams around ponds where beavers are known to be, setting traps to catch plump beavers. Today, Tom was making handicrafts when a relative he hadn't seen in years suddenly visited. The visitor was Tom's grandson, Tanner. The grandfather and grandson hadn't seen each other for 3 years. Seeing his grandson, Tom was naturally overjoyed. Holding Tanner's hand, Tom talked about the fun of living in the wilderness, which is completely different from city life. Tanner had just arrived and was really curious about the outside world. Tom noticed his restless spirit and decided to take this chance to really challenge him. Even though Tanner was here on vacation, the old man wasn't going to coddle him. He immediately assigned him a task: to clear the snow off the roof to lighten its load. Tanner was clearly not pleased. After all, he was here to vacation, not to work. But he didn't dare disobey his grandfather, So he reluctantly picked up the tools and started working. From his red, frustrated face, you could tell Tanner was feeling pretty stifled.